sure it's, okay, perfect. All right.
I want to introduce our speaker tonight. Kay Osmer is a native of Louisiana, and she earned 2 degrees at the University of Louisville at Lafayette in her hometown. Her public history Master's of Arts degree not only prepared her for the life of a historian, but additionally a life in service to the public to make history accessible, fun, and engaging to the public. She served as tour guide and curator at the Jonathan Hager House from 2018 until 2021, until she was promoted to recreation assistant with the City of Hagerstown's Parks and Recreation. Today, she serves as the recreation program coordinator and has overseen the growth and development of the Hager House New Visitor Center renovation project, led this week's initiative commemorating the town founder, and developed the Founder's Footsteps walking tour, and used her passion for preserving history to inspire and ignite the public's interest in the past. After we'll have a little reception, and if you'd like to try some of the brew from Germany that's Hub City made it's called Hager's Demise, we'll be in the other room. But thank you very much, Kay, and we're looking forward to solving the mysteries.
All right, thank you, Scott, for the introduction. So as he mentioned, I am not a native here to Maryland, and colonial America is also not my area of expertise. So a lot of the knowledge I have was learned on the job, so I by no means consider myself an expert. If there's any information I share tonight that you believe to be inaccurate or I misrepresented, please don't take it too much to heart. We all do our learning and make mistakes, and there's always new evidence to be found and stories to learn. So please take everything I say kind of with a grain of salt. So how I wanted to start today was the concept of an enigma. I do very much believe Jonathan Hager was one. The definition, a person or thing that is mysterious, puzzling, or difficult to understand. There is still so much we do not know about our town founder. Much of what we do know is through official records, land patents, deeds, sales, government records. What is missing are the letters, the journals, the diary. We still have no known portrait of him, which we'll come back to a little later. Where have these documents gone? The things that would allow us to know Hager on a more personal level. Have they been lost to history? Were they destroyed by accident? Or was he just not a sentimental man and didn't keep many personal items? Much of what we know today is based off of those official government documents and through stories and legends passed down through the generations. As a historian, my job is to find the truth, searching historical records to see what can be proven, and if those records do not exist, then we make our best educated guesses. A quote I found when doing some German research by Dixon Ryan Fox said, "History is never written finally. New materials are exhumed, new interpretations spring from new experience and new curiosities." So tonight I invite us to explore the things we do and do not know of Jonathan Hager. Some of this may be information you've already heard and are aware of, some of it may be new. But I invite us all to go through this with the perspective of a historian and be detectives tonight. There are several historians who have researched or wrote about Hager. These are the main ones that have been quoted throughout the centuries. Thomas Scharf is believed to be the first to compile a history book about Western Maryland that focused on Hager in one specific or a couple specific chapters. What's unique about older historians, or I shouldn't say unique, but the pitfall is they didn't really write down where they learned this information. They didn't do footnotes. They didn't always say who they spoke with or where they found this information. So just because they say it's true doesn't necessarily prove it's true. But because he was the first one to write down these certain facts, he kind of became quoted as though it was law. So a lot of what Scharf wrote, we now know decades later is probably inaccurate or didn't tell the full story. So Basil Sollers was around the same time period as well with the same issues. Thomas J.C. Williams, 1906. Again, this is really before there was a formal historian kind of way to study history. Mary Mish, if anyone knows how the Hager House was restored, was one of the first pioneers of historic preservation. She became very passionate about studying Jonathan Hager, and she wrote a kind of booklet about him in 1936 in their attempt to fundraise for the restoration of the Jonathan Hager House. Many of the documents that she used were found to either be inaccurate or altogether fabricated. So she was a lovely writer and she is very romantic, but I always say take it with a grain of salt. A lot of what is in there, again, does not have documentation, does not list a source, or might have been misquoted from an inaccurate source. So it's a lovely booklet. I do encourage you to read it. We have lots of copies at the Hager House, but it is more of a romanticized version of Jonathan Hager. Following her was John H. Nelson. He was the curator at the Jonathan Hager House, and he wrote, "What God does is well done," the Jonathan Hager files officially copyrighted in 1997. This was his effort to go back and redo all the research of Mish from the 1930s, either proving her findings or disproving. So he is kind of like my Bible. Anytime anyone asks me a question about Jonathan Hager, I tend to rely on the research of Nelson. And then another more recent historian is Gary Grassel. So these are a lot of the people that I use when I'm answering questions about Jonathan Hager. One quote I wanted to read from Nelson, he said, "The goal of his book was to document the source for all known facts concerning Hager and to correct certain myths and misstatements regarding one of the most influential men in the history of Maryland. He discovered that many previous facts were wrong or misinterpreted, and that the study of history is ever changing. I would not be surprised to uncover some new information on Hager after this book goes to press." So that is where we start tonight with our next first unsolved mystery, the birthplace and birth date of Jonathan Hager. There have been many theories over the years about this inconsistency. First and foremost, we know Jonathan Hager immigrated to Philadelphia in 1736 on the ship the Harl. This is a copy of the ship's ledger that lists his name. You can go to the next slide. So here we have Jonathan Hager listed as age 22. So this puts him at age 1714. This was the accepted age for him for forever. It was one of the only documentations we had that proved his age. So this would have made him 22 years old when first arriving in the country, and he would have been about 25 by the time he arrived in Western Maryland and purchased his first property. However, if you are here at Zion, his gravesite is marked with 1719. Why the difference in dates? Was he 5 years younger? Why would he have potentially lied when coming to the United States? So one of the assumptions is he was still a minor. If he was in fact 17 years old, very likely he could have been conscripted into the military during one of their wars. Maybe he was being stuck in an apprenticeship he wasn't too fond of, and he just wanted freedom, and he knew if he crossed the ocean, he would have to be older, an adult. And in some cases, that could be 18 years old, but a lot of times, to be considered a full adult, you had to be over the age of 21, so why not jump up to 22? Mish and Nelson are of the thought that perhaps somehow down the line, the family got confused. They mistook the way the numbers were written, and a 4 sometimes can look like a 9, and maybe it's just a misquote. I personally am of the mindset that he most likely lied. I believe that he probably was in fact 17 when he first emigrated. Give me just a second to catch up with my notes. Over the decades, many have tried to prove Hager's birthplace and both his birth year, searching records in Germany. An early guess was somewhere in Westphalia. You can go to the next slide. Somewhere in Westphalia, however, many were the Palatines who had emigrated during this time as well. So those were some of the assumptions, that he must have come from one of these two regions. However, over many decades, no successful documentation had been found. However, back in 1984, someone in contact with the Jonathan Hager House had said they had found a record in a church register in Germany with the date 1719, confirming his birth date. This documentation apparently was found in Heidelberg, Germany. However, I have never seen a copy of it. It's also interesting that the person who says they found this documentation didn't mention if there was a month or a birth day, just a year, and that he was an immigrated individual. So this is still potentially debated today. We do not know 100%. I am still on the hunt to find that record and have an actual copy of it on file. I do believe it exists. We've had another historian, Grassel, who supposedly found evidence of a 1719 birth date in Heidelberg. But again, I've never seen a physical copy of it. So that is one thing we would like to do. The other assumption was that he was from Berleburg. This was another possible solution because one of the only remaining letters that was addressed to Hager from a family friend that would have existed in Germany at the same time was addressed from Berleburg. So there are still lots of mysteries there to solve. So the first time they got a confirmation that they had found a record, again, without sufficient documentation, but was 1984, and then again supposedly reconfirmed in 2000. So not much is known about Jonathan Hager. He immigrated to Philadelphia in 1736. But then what happened? All his time spent traveling through Pennsylvania into Western Maryland is mostly undocumented. Again, we don't have letters, journals, diaries to tell us what he did. As far as we know, the Jonathan Hager House, Hager's fancy purchase, was his first land purchase here in the state. But we don't know how he got the money to pay for it. Did he come with money from his family in Europe? Did he earn it as a gunsmith in Philadelphia before he moved away? These are all the questions and mysteries still to be solved. So as I mentioned, we are missing lots of personal records, but we do know, in his own writing, Jonathan Hager married his wife Elizabeth in 1740. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. There's where Heidelberg is. So it's near the Palatinate region, or just a little bit more east. Next slide. This is the letter from Heinrich Vetter, and it's a little blurry, but Berleburg, and that's 1770, so about 5 years before he died. And then the next slide. So here is the plat for Hager's fancy. So this is the drawing of essentially what the land looked like when it was patented in 1745, in time for the sale of it to Jacob Rohr. So these are all historic documents we were able to source online through the Maryland State Archives. Next slide. All right, so here's our Hager house. So one of the things we do know about Jonathan Hager was he married his wife, Elizabeth Kirshner, in 1740. Comparatively, we actually know a lot more about Elizabeth and her family. Many historians have detailed their entire family ancestry. We know who her grandparents were. We know who her great-grandchildren were. There's a lot more information. At one point, we even had a copy of her baptismal record with her full birth date. So for some reason, her family's documentation was recorded a whole lot more than Jonathan Hager. So again, this leads to the question, why? What was so interesting or not interesting not to preserve these family records? Yes, ma'am.
Which generation of Elizabeth came here? Maybe because her line was here like 3 generations ago.
Not so. I believe her family had only been here less than a decade before Jonathan Hager had. So it would have only been her father. She would have.
They were able to trace her genealogy back from Germany.
Yes, there's a lot more documentation of her.
I was told once that a good friend of his, Peter Wrench, came on the boat with him, and that Peter Wrench is in the graveyard.
Okay.
All the graves that we have, I was told, don't know if it's true, but his gravestone looks new because at some point the family replaced it.
Yeah.
Got him a new headstone.
Hmm.
So that could be interesting to know if they actually came over
exactly. So there's a lot of those sorts of things, that little bits and pieces that have been told over the year, trying to get them all compiled to compare the notes. So going with the knowledge that they were married in 1740, Jonathan Hager did write in his own hand in his family Bible that they were married in 1740. With the original assumption that he was born in 1714, that would have made him about 25, I'm trying to remember now, I'm bad at math, in his 20s when she was only 15. However, if we go with the assumption that he was younger, born in 1719, they would have only been 17 and 15, which for our modern sensibilities feels a little bit more comfortable than a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old. Many historians have come to a similar conclusion that the Hager house was built by Hager after he purchased the property. This was debated actually for decades in the 20th century, but these days many believe he would not have had the ability or capability to build it before 1739. The theory is that he built the stone house for his soon-to-be bride, upgrading from the wooden cabin shack known as the sorry house, referring to its poorly built, sorry-looking property. According to Mish, in 1951, we are of the opinion that sometime between June 1739, probably the time of his marriage, and 1745, Hager built the older part of the house now standing and lived here till he sold the property to Rohr in the latter year. During its restoration in the 1950s, architectural historians tried to learn what they could about the house's history. And one very interesting fact is that we do have evidence that the house was expanded over time. So I have a couple photos here. You can leave it here, sorry. These are some renderings or a model that shows what the Hager house might have looked like when the Hagers were living here. So it would have consisted of a main level, the cellar below on the lower level, and just a simple attic above that. One of the main reasons it has been difficult to date the house is at some point when essentially that third story was added, the cornerstone was missing. So typically you would have a stone with a date of when it was built. As far as we know, this one has been missing ever since before the 20th century.
Is that common that they would do that always as they build?
It is a little bit more common when you would have had a more stately home. So it's possible when he first built it, he might not have had a cornerstone until it was expanded. But even then, we don't have a cornerstone from like the Rohr's time period, who probably would have done that. Another thing to note was the type of field stones and limestone that was used to build it. Judging by the structure and how it was built, they assumed it was built no earlier than the 1730s and had to have been built by Hager on the property. I do hope one day we can use the technology of dendrochronology, which helps date woodwork. They basically bore a hole into the wood to count the tree rings. I do hope one day to do some dendrochronology at the Hager house to help date. They use this technology at the Jonathan House cabin down the road. The old foundation was discovered during the archaeological dig, if we want to go to the next slide. So it is believed, this is example of how we think the house was expanded. So this is a photo from the 1950s during the restoration. So you can see the difference in the mortar, that there is a very distinct color difference, and there's that sloped angle. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, we had the house repointed, and you can see that diagonal line was rediscovered. So you can kind of see also a difference in the type of stones. So they're very skinny, flat, irregular shapes here. And then when you go above that, they get a little bit more structured, a little bit more rectangular, assuming they might have been quarried stones versus field stones. So this is just a little bit of architecture history. Next slide. So here is a rendering that's been at the Hager house since the 1960s of what the sorry house might have looked like. So there is evidence that there was the diamond paned glass windows. They're assuming it might have had a thatched roof and a wood cabin. We do have the evidence of the old foundation that was found that is exactly adjacent to the house. So some believe he was living in the sorry house that was existing on the property as he was building the house right next door for his new bride.
So that was the foundation of what is considered the story.
That is what we believe. So these are one of those things we don't have documentation. So we're just using our educated guesses here. Yes, exactly. So very likely he would have had help. It is still the wilderness at this point. There are not that many neighbors. So the assumption is he could have done it over a long period by himself, or if he had 3 or 4 neighbors that could have helped him do it in a single year. Again, we don't have any documentation to prove one way or the other. So these, again, are all our unsolved mysteries.
Excuse me, was Elizabeth a local girl or from another place?
No, so she was from Western Maryland, kind of general region. A lot of people had started moving out this way from Frederick out into the woods because there was a lot of free, available, cheap land. So she was a local girl. So one of the questions we have is, how long did the couple live at Hager's Fancy? The property was sold in 1745 to Jacob Rohr, but the title wasn't officially transferred until it was repatented in 1747. The same time they purchased their next property, Hager's Delight, a 2-story log cabin. Nelson argued that the couple moved likely to another property he owned called Dixon's Rest in the interim, that they would have moved out of the Hager House and moved before they moved into Hager's Delight. Some think they might have stayed there a little bit longer until 1747 and then moved directly into their new family home. Again, we're missing some documentation there. Many visitors ask, and this is still a big question, where was Hager's Delight? Unfortunately, the property was demolished in 1898, and there is no designated historical marker to show its exact location. This is the description that has been reported in a couple different historians' research, about 2 miles from Hagerstown on Mercersburg Road near Zeller Farm. It was a large log house, a fine building in those days. There were large log pens far enough apart to constitute a hall. It was considered a very stately home built out of logs, very different from the Hager House, which was built out of stone. Many believe today it would be where Interstate 81 crosses Broad Fording Road or Sear Cross near Salem Avenue. So if we go to the next slide, somewhere near Wood Point. That's our best guess. So this is supposedly where the property would have been. It was several hundred acres, but where the physical house stood is still definitely a mystery. Yes?
Is there any theory as to why they tore them down?
I haven't heard one specifically. I have a feeling it could have fallen into disrepair because it was a log cabin, or maybe it had fire damage or something like that. Not long before that, his granddaughter had passed away, and so I'm guessing probably the family was ready to move on and had other properties and didn't want to maintain the older historic cabin. That's my assumption anyway. Yes?
Why did they move? I mean, the Hager House is built on spring, and it's, it has all these interesting features.
Yes. So let's go back to that original kind of picture, thinking it was basically a 3-story house with a kitchen in the cellar. If you're trying to start a family or build a town, it's a little small, and it's also on what is now the outskirts of what becomes downtown. So I can imagine he wanted something bigger that would have more farmland. If you are familiar with City Park at all, there are a lot of springs, but there's also a lot of rocks. It's not ideal for agriculture if you're trying to grow anything or have cattle or any type of livestock. So I have a feeling this was their starter home, and he outgrew it. And they looked for more land, better land, with a much grander home. That's my assumption anyway.
In other words, I see what you're saying. That terrain is a term or phrase one could say it's the biome. The biome.
Now, is this going to be his last house?
No, so he did have a townhouse after. Oh yes, lots of questions, I love it.
Have you been done any research out of Salem United Church of Christ out of Salem Avenue?
I personally have not.
Because some of my ancestors' families built out there, and you're talking about Broad Fording Road.
Yeah.
They have some records out there of our family.
Yes, so these are all things, yes, that unfortunately we are very limited staff. So this is where I kind of encourage anyone who is interested and has the time to help us find some of those records so we can help interpret them. But yes, there's so many different places that have all these different historic records, whether it's church registries, family Bibles, courthouse records. There's so many places that could have the little bits and pieces, and it's just putting them all together to piece the puzzle.
Salem, out there, how close to Salem is. You know, Church of Christ. Is that the little white one around the corner? I'm not sure. But it's on Salem Church.
So as far as we know, they had moved to Hager's Delight by 1747. We haven't talked yet about Hager's children. We do know the first documented child was a girl with a baptismal record dated July 1748. We do know they didn't have a name, so very likely died less than a year before or after their birth. Their next child was not born until 1752, which would be Rosanna, and then their son, 1755. This brings up the notion that we have no knowledge if they had any children while they lived at Hager's Fancy. Again, if we go back to the assumption that they might have only been 15 and 17, you would think they probably would have had lots of children. But we have no record of that, so that's one of the mysteries we do have. Any children that are documented, we know would have happened at Hager's Delight. With this assumption, their children were born 8, 12, and 15 years into their marriage. They were married in 1740. This is interesting, I think. His wife passed away at a fairly young age. She passed away in 1765 at age 40. According to the passage written in the Hager family Bible, she passed away after severe suffering. One of my personal theories is that she must have suffered from infertility and very likely had an illness after she had her children and never quite recovered. Of course, this is all conjecture, with no letters or journals, just a few sentences in their family Bible. There is not much to go on. But 3 children, 8, 12, and 15 years into their marriage, I think says they did have a personal struggle in their family. Interestingly, to this day, as I mentioned, we have no known portrait of Jonathan Hager. However, we do have one of his daughter. So this is our best reference for any likeness. Interestingly, Jonathan Jr. also does not have a portrait. He served in the American Revolution after his father passed away. But since she married a general, I guess she was important enough to have a documented portrait preserved. So the Hagers are definitely a mystery as far as their likeness is concerned. As you've probably seen on all of our graphics, we've used a simple silhouette to recognize him because we do not know his profile. We do have a vague idea of his size based off of some waistcoats that are part of the collection at the Hager House. But for the most part, we have no idea what he looked like. One of the other big mysteries about Hager's personal life was his religion. There have been many debates and research trying to prove his religious allegiance. There is documentation that Hager hosted Moravians at his home, and he contributed both lands and funds to the construction of more than one church in Hagerstown, including the very church we are standing in today, located on Potato Hill. However, it is consistent with Hager that he never seemed to show any preference for any formal religious group throughout his lifetime. Gary Grassel, who was the historian most recent, who did research in the 2000s, put forth an interesting theory that I have actually come accustomed to favoring. His theory is that Jonathan Hager may have practiced a form of Lutheran pietism. It became prominent in Germany in places like Berleburg, where we know he had friends. This particular doctrine emphasized the Bible and individual piety, living a holy Christian life. It emphasized personal devotion, emotional experience, and moral transformation over the perceived theological scholasticism. It encouraged small, informal gatherings to study the Bible and focused on personal, active faith. I feel like these words very much describe how Jonathan Hager was remembered. So he very much could have been an active member of any of these churches, including the German Reformed Church. But he definitely was a man who seemed to have a very active faith. Nelson was quoted that he was strictly an honorable, God-fearing man, far-sighted in business, but honest, diligent, and generous. Better educated than the majority of German immigrants, a Christian man of virtue and mercy. So that is still another mystery to be solved.
Where was the daughter baptized?
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Where was the daughter baptized?
So where was the daughter baptized? I actually cannot recall off the top of my head.
Oh, it's not on the paper you showed us?
No, it just has her birth date. Yes, that's just his documentation of the birth dates. So yeah, the question was where was the daughter baptized? And I don't recall. I know we know where the youngest daughter was, the one born in 1768, but I'm not quite sure about Rosanna and Jonathan Jr. Yes.
You said Lutheran pietism?
Pietism.
Oh, it's just P.
Pietism. Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to the founding of Hagerstown and his death. There have been many mysteries around the original founding date of our city. 1762 is the officially designated year, however, many historians still debate this. Much of the land that makes up the original plat of downtown Hagerstown was part of a tract he purchased called New Work in 1765. You can go to oh, you're already on it. You're good. Hager had been buying up property mainly from 1759 to 1762. Some believe the town was being laid out in 1761. Scharf was the main source to proclaim 1762. Many believe it might have tied into the Antietam battlefield date. Sollers was another historian who agreed with this. Another placed it even later at 1768, when the first lot was actually physically sold. Prior to this, it was believed that everyone rented property from Jonathan Hager. So this is our kind of timeline. 1759 was when he started acquiring land, all the way till 1768 when he sold his first property. Again, without a journal, letter, or a historic document to proclaim Hager's intentions, this is all hypothesis. Personally, I lean toward a 1765 option. I truly believe that Hager had early plans and was likely laying out the town around 1762. However, the death of his wife in 1765, I believe, may have influenced the name of the town. Even though his youngest child would have only been 10 years old at the time, he never remarried, and he named a town in her honor. I don't know that he would have been as active starting a town when his wife was sick and suffering at home. I do believe it might have been something he became more actively pursuing and involved in after her passing. So that is my personal kind of assumption. Hager died just 10 years later in 1775, the very year we are celebrating today. There are multiple versions of Hager's death. Scharf was the first to record it. His version said that Hager died at a sawmill, possibly owned by Hager, and that while they were milling lumber for the Zion Church, a timber rolled off the machine and was crushed. Some say he died at the mill, others that he had been moved to a home and passed away later from injuries. However, just a few decades later, it was reported that this was incorrect, but I will read Scharf's version first. The elder Hager was accidentally killed November 6, 1775, in his 61st year at a sawmill near the sty of Hager's mill, by a large piece of timber rolling upon him and crushing him. The timber was being sawed for the German Reformed Church, which Mr. Hager was very active in building. Once again, I will point out the inconsistency here if we go with the assumption he was born in 1719. He was 56, not 61, but who's to say? Then, within a decade, the story had changed. According to Frank and Rachel Schwartz, who wrote a book on Zion church history, they reported that he had died at the church during its construction. The boring version is that a piece of timber fell on him and he died. The more fascinating one is the reenactment that I love to assist with. The story is that a beam fell from the roof and he rushed forward to protect a bystander, and he reached out with his cane. As far as I'm aware, there's not an official record of this story here at the church, but it is a lovely tall tale to share. According to one of our historians, the accident happened at the site of the church building, probably within the confines of the stone walls. When he stepped forward to steady his cane, a long, heavy beam hoisted into place, evidently high in the support of the roof. The log slit, falling on the proprietor, who sustained injuries, resulting in his death shortly thereafter. According to Mish, both Hager and his wife were originally buried in their family vault at Hager's Delight. However, again, she listed no footnote or source as to where she got this information. It is only, and then was only moved to Zion after a current marker was placed after the death of his great-granddaughters and his granddaughter Elizabeth, who lived into her 80s. She passed away in 1867, and we know the house was demolished in 1898. Perhaps when Hager's Delight was destroyed, or just because the family wanted to be buried all together, they were relocated all at once at this new location here at Zion Reformed. Mitch supposes the family misunderstood the birth date. However, in the family Bible, his son had a message after his father died. My father was born in the year 1719 and lived until the year 1775. Then it pleased God to take him from this world on the 6th of November in a sudden death. I believe his son would have known his accurate age. So that is one of the last mysteries we know about Jonathan Hager. The specifics of his death, where he was buried, and once again, how old was he when he died? So this is where I will leave us tonight. If there are any further questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. I do have an activity kind of set up next door if anyone wants to stay and look at them. I had the ship's log kind of pulled up with his name attached. We also have the oath of abjuration and oath of allegiance he would have had to sign his name on when coming off the ship. So if anyone wants to take a crack at it, you can see if you can find Jonathan Hager's signature. Questions? Yes.
I read that he was a stowaway. Where did that come from? Have you heard of it?
Until you mentioned that to me like a couple weeks ago, I had never heard that one. Again, I'm not a local, so I don't know all the stories. I only learned them starting 8 years ago, so I'm still learning. Yes.
I had a visitor come for a tour of the church and was related to General Hager, William Hager, who was the architect and general contractor working with Jonathan Hager. And he said there's an old family legend that when it came to changing the name of the town from Elizabethtown to whatever, that they didn't know whether they wanted to name it Hagerstown or Heiserstown.
Mm-hmm.
So they flipped a coin, and evidently Jonathan won.
Won.
The coin flip. But Mr. Heiser said that that's an old family legend, whether it's true or not.
There's a lot of those, and I love them. I love to tell them, but I always say, just because I have the perspective of the historian, I'm like, do you have any documentation to support it? Because then I will repeat it incessantly and give it a lot more claim. But they're fun stories, and I love hearing all the local legends. Yes?
Now, you said that they, supposedly they were buried at that
Hager's Delight, their second property.
But you said that wasn't the last place he was at?
Yes, I didn't really cover that because there's
Yeah.
not as much mystery there. So
Okay.
later in his life, he did have a townhouse on the square. It was lot number 12 on the northeast corner. So later on, after his wife passed, he ended up running for office. He was elected to the assembly, and Mr. Penrod, who's here, had done a talk kind of about this earlier this week. But he's believed to be the first naturalized citizen to serve in office in Maryland. He was elected by popular vote, but technically the law was that you had to be an English-born citizen to serve, and obviously he was German. At first they denied his election, and then within a few days, a couple weeks, they reversed their decree and he was able to be elected. So the assumption is he had his townhouse in the center square after the town was founded, and he would have been commuting back and forth to Annapolis. So he had a property he was living in on the square. The assumption is, I think, his daughter might have been living at Hager's Delight, and then he would have had probably a second home at Annapolis near the assembly.
You mentioned a letter from a friend from Heidelberg, but maybe the friend moved there. That doesn't mean he was from there.
Yes, that's exactly right. The assumption is it shows that he had a connection to that region and that maybe that individual had lived there for a long time, but not necessarily that that was where they met or where he originated from. If I know anyone going to Germany anytime soon, I'm going to ask for a favor. Yes, so we have a few of his handwriting samples on the family Bibles and prayer books. Obviously, he had his name signed on a few like land deeds and estate records and things like that. But as far as we know, other than that, if the family had them, maybe they didn't donate them when the house was being restored. But yeah, so we're hoping they exist somewhere, and we'll find them one day, and it'll answer all the questions. So that's one of the things we're hoping this week kind of reignites that interest to solve these mysteries.
Ray?
Yes, Ray. Oh, he's got a mic for you.
Jonathan had a brother named David
Yes.
who moved out to what is now Illinois. And there is a Hagerstown there. And I'm wondering if
Is it
there's...
Illinois or Indiana?
Indiana, I'm sorry. And I'm wondering if there's any records out there that might help uncover some mysteries of his brother Jonathan.
So this is something I haven't personally had a chance to look into. There is a lot more information about David Hager because one thing I haven't really gotten into, because again, it's not a mystery. Jonathan Hager had 2 children. His son only had 1 child. His daughter had no biological children. So he only had 1 grandchild. And once she was married, we lost the Hager name. And so a lot of the history is harder to trace after that. David Hager had lots of children. They had lots of children after that, lots of cousins and things. There was a lot more people to help preserve and store the family records. I think so they do probably have a lot more information than we do, but I haven't ever had a chance to go back and see if they have ancestry records for David or if it's only his descendants. It would be, yes. He's got a mic for you.
Thank you kindly, family. Thanks for asking. Thank you. I have a lot, but I'll ask one-on-one, but some questions. This is interesting. I'm actually learning more about the man the town that I was born in originally. I grew up I lived in several places. I'm from here originally, but I lived in Northern Virginia at one point in my life, Southern Virginia, different in here, but I'm part German as well, but so go to Bonn, Germany, home of Beethoven. Fun fact, Ludwig, not Wig, but I digress. But when I hear this story, it's like not magnanimous. It's more like how you break it down, like the novelty, the notion, vague idea. It's interesting, when you look at the anthropological and sociological studies of people. It's like all the questions that are unearthed, all the questions that are driven. It's like because you have to think about it from a Western civilization, standpoint, and there's a lot that we're learning, and you would be amazed at how many people live here but don't even take the time to inquiry, about things in life, and
Yep.
And
he definitely seemed to be a very ambitious man, and maybe he was just too busy to write it all down.
No. I have more that I'll ask one-on-one, but he's Jonathan Hager, Hagerstown.
Yeah.
Or Heiserstown.
Any other questions? Oh,
Is it true that there was another Jonathan Hager in the area that was unrelated?
yes, so there were multiple.
were.
So there
How odd
was
is that?
Jonathan Hager founder and Jonathan Jr. There was another Jonathan Hager and Jonathan Jr. And then I think there was even a 5th one. So one was known as the Tavern Keeper. Matt can help me here. It's been a long time since I've given tours, so some of the information's a little fuzzy. There was a Tavern Keeper, and who were the other ones? I think were a couple decades later, in the 60s?
What doesn't help is that 2 John Juniors end up doing business together and buying properties.
Oh, yeah, that doesn't make it confusing.
And then when you put the signatories, you've got Jonathan Hager Jr. sells to Jonathan Hager Jr. It gets out of hand very fast.
Yes, so there were multiple Hagers, and this actually happens a lot. So people come to visit us all the time at the Jonathan Hager House Museum, and they're like, oh, I'm a descendant of Jonathan Hager. And we're like, okay, great, show us your family tree. And we're like, okay, this one already, the date doesn't quite seem right. And they're like, okay, so who's this cousin? And we're like, oh, no, yep, you got the wrong. We're like, thank you for coming. We would love to tell you about our Jonathan Hager, but you are not a direct descendant. It happens all the time. We get a lot of Kirshner relatives too. As I mentioned, they're a very large family. I think they've mostly settled in the Ohio area. They are very active. We get them visiting all the time, even if they're not directly related. They're distant cousins, and they want to come visit the Hager House. Yes?
Are there, I'm assuming there is, but are there any people today that are known to be direct descendants of?
We do. I will offer that we probably aren't the best at keeping that database up to date. As far as I know, there's still maybe at least 3 that we are in contact with who are direct descendants, but I do not off the top of my head know names. So when the house was being restored and the museum being furnished, a lot of the items were donated by the Kaiser Clark family. That was the descendant kind of current namesake who are in possession of the items. So if I were to kind of hunt for any currently, I would probably start there and see who branched out from that family.
So no one has tried, because now it's
much easier to do research online to find at least his parents' name, because then that would really.
So I'm sure some people have. What kind of happens is it happens generationally. So it kind of started back in the 40s and 50s when the house was being preserved. And then with like the bicentennial, when we were celebrating the town founding and everything in 1962, there was kind of renewed interest. And so now here we are again, the 250th of his death. It's like every 30, 40 years, there's kind of renewed interest. Otherwise, we just kind of take it for granted and we're not always as curious. So we hope that someone is willing to do that research. Unfortunately, a lot of our time is designated to running the Hager House Museum, and we don't have as much time for research as we would like. So we can't always hunt every crumb. Thank you all so much for all the questions.
Would you tell us what is yet to come in the next couple of days? Do you have it?
Sure
Or?
thing. So tomorrow is our main event. We will be returning here for the celebration of life. We will have some local speakers from different organizations, as well as some scripture, music, and then afterwards we encourage everyone to either come outside for a graveside blessing, or there will be an option to kind of peer through a window to observe. We'll see what the weather's like and how dark it is, who wants to make that trek over. And then Saturday, I'm skipping ahead. Friday is the graveyard tour here. So our lovely tour guides who just wrapped up the ghost tours at the Hager House will be doing outdoor tours. If anyone wants to know who's buried here, the who's who of Hagerstown, we'll be doing that Friday night, starting at 6 as well. And then Saturday is the Art Walk, second Saturday event hosted by Downtown Hagerstown. They'll have lots of activities going on downtown. The Hub City Brewery will have music and a brand new beer. What's the name of it?
Okay, the beer we have tonight is Hager's Demise. On Saturday, they're debuting their stout, which is called Watch Your Noggin. Watch Your Noggin. So go down there and enjoy that.
Saturday's fun-filled activities downtown. If you haven't had a chance to do the walking tour, you're welcome to. We are already talking about, so one of the downsides of this event is it is in November. It's cold, it gets dark really early. It's not ideal for a lot of jubilation. So we're hoping to bring back the walking tour with a guided tour experience coming next year in 2026 as we continue the America 250 celebrations.
If you have a computer, though, Kay designed, with other help,
With other help.
a marvelous online version. So you can
There
go
it
on
is.
to it.
So I'm going to actually plug that real quick. So
Good.
we have a virtual tour of the founder's footsteps as well. I highly encourage you to check it out because it has bonus content that is not on the pamphlet version. So it's got special quotes about Jonathan Hager and Hagerstown. It also has, did you know, well, you might know this, 1790, George Washington made a visit here to Elizabethtown. Did you know he was invited? We have the letters. Actually, I forgot, I have copies of the letters.
Ooh.
I need to get those online. So they were invited by 3 citizens. The story is he stayed in the Globe Inn for at least a night, if not a couple nights. And then he wrote a letter back thanking the citizens for inviting him to our lovely town. There's also information about the Jonathan Street Cabin on there and some of the other historic churches around the neighborhood. So highly invite you to check it out. It gives you just a little bit extra that isn't on the paper version. So all at hager250.org. So if you go to the Founder's Footsteps, we have a virtual version of the paper copy, and then if you look for where it says virtual tour, there's a couple different ways you can get to it, but it'll open up something that's created by the City Engineering Department using GIS. So it's very fancy. Yes.
I have a question. I do a lot of metal detecting in the area, and I found a lot of artifacts going way back.
Yeah.
And if the Indians were here, whether they were McCoy or Sioux or Blackfoot or Navajo
So
in the area.
I get asked this question all the time, and I always do my hardest to get the most accurate current information. And of course, I don't have it in front of me, and I won't remember word for word what they are. But I don't believe they were any of the ones you just mentioned. I think there were about 4 different tribes that passed through this area. And this is something that I could probably add to our website just as kind of a side note. But there were active communities here, not all of them permanent residents in the area. A lot of them traveled along the warrior trading path. But yeah, I think there's at least 4 that were known to be in this area, but I honestly don't think it was any of the ones you just mentioned, and I cannot recall off the top of my head. But I can try and answer that if you reach out to the Hager House. We'll get the answer to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kay. Marvelous. If you have other questions, please ask her in the hall. If you can't come back tomorrow, I'm the pastor here, but if you can't come back tomorrow, Ray Smith is our docent, is also our church administrator, and she'll give you a tour at any point if she's able to, so you can reach out.
And again, I apologize if there was anything I misquoted or misrepresented. Again, I'm not a local, so.
All right. Thank you very much.
On the job.
Okay, go get some of those special cookies. You deserve them.
Yes. And I still encourage you to see if you can find Hager's name, his signature. I'm going to take my mic off and just drop it off, and then I'll be back that way.